Hello again! In this video I'm going to show you how I went about converting Oathmark figures from one-handed weapons to two-handed polearms. Here are some dwarves I prepared earlier. So to begin with, we're going to need to pick what parts we want. For this demo I've picked a couple of bodies off the sprue and had a look for arms that are going to suit my purposes. In this case I wanted one holding the polearm up to his side and the other one thrusting it forward in front of him. The tools we're going to need are a pair of side cutters, a knife, you'll need various files, I've got a razor saw, and a pin vise with various drill bits. I'll be using 1mm and 1.5mm bits. So to start we're going to use the side cutters and we're going to use them to cut off the excess parts we don't need. So here at the top of the weapon above the thumb and below the hand. We just want to get rid of the lion's share with the side cutters. We'll clean up the rest of it with the knife. Being careful not to cut yourself. Just slowly working your way through the plastic, cutting it off flush with the bottom of the hand. And we'll just take the time to give it a bit of a clean up and cut around the edge of the sleeve to make that all nice and tidy. And we want to cut the top part just above the top of the thumb off nice and flat to make it easier to draw that area out. And we'll take the time to remove the mould lines. For those who are unaware, instead of cutting them off, you can scrape your blade sideways across them and shave them off. I find this technique a lot more precise than cutting the mould lines, and a big advantage is you can't accidentally cut too deep doing this. And done. Right, so the next step is to poke a little hole using the end of the knife in the center of the shaft, in the center of the grip there, on both sides to help with aligning the pin vise. Speaking of which, we grab the pin vise with a 1mm drill bit in it and we begin to drill out the hand. Take your time, make sure you're central in the existing shaft or the existing hand, and make sure you're nice and straight. We want to drill in about halfway, and then we'll drill in from the other side to go the whole way through. The reason we're drilling in from both sides is we want to control exactly where the drill bit comes out and therefore where the shaft is going to come out. We don't want it on an angle coming out the side of the hand. If possible, we want it coming out exactly from the center. Now you'll see me drilling in at quite an angle here. The reason I'm doing that is the initial hole has started a little bit too close to the fingers and I want to push that back a bit. So by starting drilling the hole on an angle and then straightening up afterwards, I'm able to move it to a better position. And there we go, we've popped through. This hand's a little bit different to the ones you normally do. Normally the thumb will wrap around the weapon shaft, but in this case it's running along the back of it. So I need to cut out the excess shaft. This is achieved simply by running the knife along the edge of the thumb and then cutting around the bottom edge just above the top of the hand. Take your time and be careful, you don't want to cut yourself if you can help it. And once I've removed the bulk of it, I'll then go in and just give it a bit of a tidy up. Apologies for the awful focusing on the camera. Hopefully you can get the gist of what's going on though. And with that all cleaned up, we're going to go through and drill the hole in the hand again, but this time using a larger drill bit. In this case it'll be 1.5mm, which is the same size as the replacement weapon shaft. Take your time and be careful. As you can see, the plastic's turning white here. That's because it's been stretched, and we want to be careful that we don't snap it. The reason it's been stretched is twofold. Number one, this drill is probably about the largest size you want to put through there. Any larger and you'd actually be cutting the hand to bits. And number two, it's probably a little bit on the blunt side. And now we can fit the weapon to the hand. In this case, it's a very tight fit, but that's absolutely perfect. And we'll just push it through. Twist it around to the orientation I want, and we'll put it up next to the body so you can get an idea of how it'll look. So this one was nice and easy, just going in one hand straight up and down. The next one we're going to do is going to be a little bit more complicated. Using the sword and bow arm pictured here, the plan is to have this next model look like he's thrusting his bill forward, attempting to drag a wolf rider out of the saddle. The initial steps are exactly the same as the last one. We're going to trim off the excess and drill a hole through the hands. Where it differs, however, is we're going to have to cut the wrists so that we can reposition them. So what we do is we put the hands onto the shaft of the weapon. This way when we cut it off we're not going to lose it. And then I will cut the wrist off using the razor saw. Take your time and be careful doing this. If, like me, you're cutting against your hand, make sure you don't put any downwards pressure on the blade. Instead, use the weight of the blade to cut through the plastic, and that way you shouldn't cut yourself. After cutting the wrists off, we then have to clean up the rough edges left by the saw. And that's just the same as moving mould lines. We just scrape the side of the blade around the edges to tidy it up. Repeat the process with the second hand. And now we can begin the process of gluing it all together. So we're going to start by gluing the right arm on around about here. We don't need to make any changes to the right arm, so this part's nice and easy. And when we're happy with that position, we'll have a look at the left arm. So as you can see, to begin with, it sticks out quite far to the side, and we want to bring it across the front of the body like so. So just got to work out how much we've got to take out. Quite a bit by the looks, and we're going to do that with a file. In order to get the arm to sit where I want it to, I'm going to have to file in quite a large step into the arm. And I've got to make sure that it's at the right angle as well, so that the arm ends up pointing in the correct direction. So as we're filing, we'll constantly check it and make sure we're in the right place. If we're not, we just adjust as need be. Again, just take your time and go back and forward, checking as many times as you need to get it where you want it. If you take too much off, it's not the end of the world, because we'll be filling in any gaps with a little bit of putty anyway. Eventually I end up with the shoulder in a position I like, and the next step is to adjust the elbow. I'm going to achieve this by cutting out a small wedge from the inside of the elbow using the razor saw. Again, take your time. It's not the end of the world if you cut right through. Of course it's plastic, you can glue it back on, but ideally we just want to remove a wedge and leave the outside of the elbow untouched. Now we can bend the elbow, and with a spot of glue and the inside of the wedge, it'll remain in place. Here's what it looks like so far. A bit of glue and it's starting to come together. To glue the elbow up, I'm going to use extra thin plastic glue. The reason I'm using the extra thin is that it's going to penetrate into where I need it a lot easier than the regular thick stuff, and it'll also dry quite quickly. So I paint a little bit around the area I need it, and then squeeze the parts together for a few seconds. It's not quite where I want it, so I add a little bit more of the super thin glue and hold it again. And there we go, I'm pretty happy with that. We'll check it up against the weapon, so it's going to be pointing in the right direction. Yep, I'm pretty happy. So I just need to adjust the position of the hands on the weapon shaft. Thus. So I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. I do want to raise the left hand a bit, so I'm going to have to take off a bit under the arm there. To achieve that, I'm going to use a file. And again, just remove the material that I need to. Make sure you keep checking so you're heading in the right direction. Adjust the hands on the shaft as need be. And once you're happy, we can glue it all together. And then we'll leave it to dry. And here we are the next day. I've glued the head on. To do that I had to remove some of the beard, but that was easily done with the techniques I've already shown. And now it's time to start filling some of the gaps. To do that I'm just going to be using a little bit of epoxy putty. I just place a little bit in the areas that need filling, such as the wrist and end of the cuff here. And then it's just a case of smushing the putty around until I've got it into the shape that I like. So I want to move it around to make sure that I'm filling all of the gaps. And then I'm going to use the edge of the sculpting tool to define the line of the cuff. And then begin to smooth everything out to hide the join between the putty and the plastic. Same down onto the hand. I've got a wee bit much putty here, so it's just a case of scraping the excess off and then smoothing it off again. Here we are a couple of minutes later, once I'm happy with the shape and the transition. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the needle tool to just put a couple of creases into the end of the cloth so it's not quite so flat. This is as easy as just pressing the side of the needle into the putty. And then we'll move on and fill the gap around the shoulder. We're going to have to put a chainmail pattern into this putty, and to do so we'll use the exact same technique we used on the aventail of the elven helmets in my previous video. And once the sculpting's done, we can leave it to dry and the miniature will be ready to be painted. Here he is, getting ready to drag an unfortunate rider of Rohan from his saddle. Anyway, thanks guys, I hope you found the video useful or entertaining or what have you. Anyway, cheers, we'll see you next time.